welcome John Keogh, who many of you most likely already know. He has vast experience in all things supply chain, probably more experience in supply chains than I am old, most certainly. So always good to get those insights. And John has been a supporter and a major contributor to Origin Trail since early on, since the early days. So John, thank you for joining, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, and good afternoon to everyone from Toronto. You can hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you well.
Perfect. I'll go into presentation mode here, and you can see my screen fine?
Also loaded well, yeah.
Wonderful, perfect. So hi to everyone out there. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, and to all those tracers around the world. Great to be engaged again. I was delighted to be asked to provide a briefing this morning. So before I get into the juicy stuff, I got about 20-25 minutes. I want to share something from John Denton. Now, John and I used to sit close enough to each other at APEC. John was representing Australia, and now he's the Secretary General at the ICC, International Chamber of Commerce. Just look at a couple of the points that John made recently up on LinkedIn. We must work together to ensure the free flow of data across borders and between different stakeholders. And he goes on by saying at the end, what I've also enhanced here in red, by enhancing the availability and interoperability of data across borders, we can create new avenues of growth and innovation as we rebuild beyond the crisis, the COVID-19 crisis. So this is an example. If any of you want to follow John, I would recommend that you do. He's doing some incredible work, of course, globally, and also touching in with the World Trade Organization, World Customs, and others. So what I want to go through today is the first three components here. Is I want to again reiterate the complexity of the food chain. And the reason I want to stress the complexity is because of what you heard earlier from BSI and also from Oracle. And I want to reiterate the importance of transparency and trust as foundational layers in everything we do. Then I'll talk about digital ecosystems, and the digital ecosystem slides I will show you are work in progress from my own research. And then I'll also show you resilience, and we'll talk about resilience in context of COVID-19 and how you can build resilient supply chains. And then I'll summarize it together. So this is a slide I've been using for about 15 years. Look at the meal on the right-hand side. As you sit down for that meal, you're wondering, where did that fish come from? Is that really wild or farmed salmon? I paid 30% premium on that product. And where's the proof? Where's the evidence? You can't see the outside of the fish, its head, its scales. So what is it actually a salmon? You know, is my milk diluted, or is it adulterated? In some countries around the world, unfortunately, we have that problem. Hence, companies like Swiss Decode in Geneva had to develop tests which were to detect animal DNA in plant-based milks and vice versa. So these are things that shouldn't be happening, and unfortunately, they are happening right around the world. And we know, of course, that the melamine crisis in China was milk dilution to be able to fake the testing for protein in the product. Is my product really organic? How do you test that? How do you verify that? Is there heavy metal contamination in my food? And when you talk about transparency, it's not only industry that needs to be transparent, it's also governments. So 3 years ago, I was in a briefing in the US with the FDA, and they said children under 3 years of age should not be consuming any rice products because of the naturally occurring arsenic that's in those products, are in the rice and rice products, and children under 3 don't have the body mass to process that. Now, can you imagine if the government of Vietnam, India, China, Thailand told moms not to give rice to their children? It would create an uproar. So I think instantly in that country, you got to figure out, how do you test the rice, and how can you be transparent to make sure that not only are you being transparent on where the product came from, its actual provenance, but also on the health outcomes. And that's something I just want to add has become very, very important. And there's a whole bunch of other things here. Is my honey pure, adulterated? Is there chemical or pesticide residue in my product? And is this rice and coffee really from Vietnam? And ultimately, what we want to know, is the food safe to eat? Now, on that issue of is the rice and coffee really from Vietnam, I had conversations previously, as many of you would know. I lived in Vietnam for about 6 years, and there is fraud going on in Vietnam and there's fraud going on in other countries. So here's one key point. Data provenance is not the same as the analytical or the scientific provenance of a product. Many solution providers confuse those two. Data provenance is when the data enters the system. The analytical or the scientific provenance is the physical piece of ground that the product came out of, the food product, or the pond that the fish came out of. This is a very important distinction. And this problem comes up every now and again in the supply chain when we have fraud issues. We had raspberries that came from Chile into Canada as product of Chile, but they were actually from China and they came via New Zealand. So we've got to watch out for that one. We've got to get our language right. Data provenance is not the same as scientific provenance of the food. Ultimately, what I'm calling out for here is just to remind you all that it's the natural sciences that enables transparency and trust, with the objective certainty in terms of the ascertainable and verifiable characteristics of the food product. What does that mean? It means that we need to include the analytical science, the laboratories, the verification, the testing into all of our platforms. Software cannot prove any of these things. IoT cannot prove any of these things. As we layer solutions on top of each other, we can layer on top of a blockchain, we can layer smart contracts, IoT, we can do AI, but we need the science. That's one of my critical messages. Transparency. I've been talking about this for a long time, and those who know me know that I research deeply in the area of transparency and trust in supply chains. A lot of words out there: truth, accuracy, honesty, believability. My favorite definition of transparency is from Professor Geert-Jan Hofstede from Wageningen University. You may be familiar with that name, Hofstede. His father, Professor Geert Hofstede, is the genius who came out with the cultural studies in the 1980s, and we've learned a lot from his work. So all of these beautiful words, but in this definition here, he talks about a net chain, which is the network and the supply chain together. And he talks about transparency of a net chain is the extent to which all of the net chain stakeholders have a shared understanding. Think shared understanding, think GS1 standards. And access to product-related information that they request. I'll come back to this in a few moments on the they request. This is very important. And it's without loss, noise, delay, or distortion. Loss and delay can come from a lack of interoperability. Noise and distortion, unfortunately, can come from marketing with claims that are not true. So as you genetically modify a product, this is also something that's very important for consumers to know about. Now, I want to show you this slide that's a work in progress that I'm working on, is on a transparency continuum. If you look at the red line above here, regulation is the driver of disclosure for companies. On the one hand, they must, by regulation, keep secrets. And then when they do disclose, based on the regulatory requirements, they have to be truthful. So they do have to keep secrets, they do have to be truthful. Now at the bottom, the blue line here, competitiveness is a driver of disclosure. On the one hand, we have what we call more opacity, and then we have transparency for consumer purposes. So the secrets that we have in the food industry around IP, around our specifications, our recipes, our formulas, but also our suppliers, our customers, costs, margins, and so on. And as we get into trusted B2B relationships, we will trust more. Untrusted, we will trust less. So on the right-hand side, consumers are putting pressure on the system for more environmental or social information. We often call these ESG, environmental, social, and governance-related issues in supply chains. So consumers want to know where the product came from. And remember, again, its provenance is the physical piece of ground that it came out to, as verified by analytical science, not software, not IoT. So things like a carbon-13 analysis and other elemental analysis can do that. There's a company in Australia in Perth called Source Certain, and there's others out there who are doing a tremendous job in that specific area. And there's a company in California doing radical transparency. Now, I don't like that term, radical transparency, because I don't believe we can do simple transparency yet. But this is Everlane, and they're sharing their suppliers, their costs, and their margins. So this is the dilemma that we have. On the one hand, we have to keep secrets, and then when we do disclose, we have to be truthful. And you remember what happened with Enron and WorldCom? They were very transparent, but they were transparent with fake information or false information. This is why we have Sarbanes-Oxley right now, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, and we also don't have Andersen Consulting because they lost their social license to operate. So as I mentioned earlier, if you have trusted B2B relations, you'll trust more, you'll share more. If they're untrusted, you'll trust less, you'll share less. Now, Sodhi and Tang, Professor Tang is in one of the California universities. He's a great academic in the area of risk. And he talks about, this is something that I wrote, I just put a little caption of it here. The rationale for a firm's reluctance to share information voluntarily may be to limit their reputational risk of being guilty by association with suppliers who had bad practices exposed. And conversely, they argue that firms could be guilty by omission if they are not fully transparent. So, and then environmental scholars are also saying that firms must consider who has the right to know, what do they have a right to know, when do they have a right to know it, and how will that information be shared. This is very, very important. So what you saw earlier with the British Standards Institute and with the Origin Trail platform, this is where companies can reduce that pressure by being guilty by association or guilty by omission because they're getting information that's trusted. This is so critical. So the solution you heard about earlier is a vital element in getting rid of this concern that businesses have. Now on trust, this is another very important one here. Russo got together with a number of other academics and came up with a generic definition. There are about 140 different definitions out there of trust. And of course you have trust in different contexts, B2B, government trust, interpersonal trust, and so on. But what they came up with was trust is a psychological state comprising of the intention to accept a vulnerability based upon the positive expectations and the intentions and behaviors of another. So think about this. Think about that meal that you saw on my very first slide. You go into a restaurant. You are accepting a vulnerability by going into that restaurant. And you have a positive expectation that everybody, the fisher, the guy who caught the salmon for you, the farmer, on the vegetable side, all the processors in between, and they may have come from many, many thousands of kilometers away, that you believe that their intentions and their behavior was aimed at getting you a safe product. Now there's a lot of trust expectations in there, so we're accepting this vulnerability when we go to a restaurant. Ultimately, again, we can trust, but we need to verify, and this again is my call that we need to include the science, the analytical science, we need to include the laboratories into our solutions. If we are not including the laboratories into our solutions, we're missing the point here. And this is critical. This is what we call the authoritative source. The authoritative source is the data creator or the attribute creator. In the case of a laboratory, they should be connected directly into the platform or into the ecosystem, I should say. And that's a very, very important part. If you have brand owners that are providing information, there's too much risk of falsification of that data. This is what BSI talked about earlier. This is what they're seeing on a daily basis all over the world to a different extent in different industries and different countries. And we know that food trust has two big enemies, bad character and bad data. We can fix the bad data mostly, but we can never eliminate bad character. So we need to still think like a criminal and think of how can we bulletproof our solutions? Because bad data or collusion equals immutable lies. And this is the caution that we have when we're using blockchains. We talk about its mutability or immutability. We don't want to have immutable falsehoods in supply chains or immutable lies, as I call them. Now, bad character is all around us, even good companies. Bad character are not only criminals. Good companies, legitimate companies also cheat. Again, this is why we have companies like BSI. This is why we have laboratories like SourceCertain and tools like Swiss Decode to be able to help us in this journey. And trust must be included in the whole DIKW framework from Airsoft. Data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. Data must be trusted. If the data is not trusted, the information can't be trusted. And as you build from data up to information and up to knowledge, if the first one, data, is not trusted, your information will not be trusted. Your knowledge cannot be trusted. And ultimately, the wisdom won't be trusted. Now, the first three of these, data, information, and knowledge, are looking at the history. They're looking backwards in the supply chain. Wisdom is looking forward and trying to predict what may happen in the future. This is a very, very important concept. If we don't get the data trusted, if we don't get the information trusted, we're basically on a losing game here. And this is why the solutions that this team had talked about earlier, and we'll talk about later, are so critical. And this is why GS1 standards are also critical here. So digital ecosystems, what are digital ecosystems? Ecosystems typically encompass any set of interacting producers, suppliers, innovators, customers, and regulators that shape a collective outcome. Sometimes geographical, and sometimes they focus on a sector. Now, this is the work in progress from my own work, but essentially you have various types of production ecosystems, and then you have various types of consumption ecosystems, which could be the consumer, it could be food service, it could be institutional consumers. But we also have various different regulatory ecosystems. One could be purely for reporting on environmental or safety, and the other one could be, reporting on food safety. Or in fact, in the case of animal meat in Canada, for example, you have to get regulatory approval before you ship the products. And then we have the assurance ecosystem. So the net of this is we have many ecosystems that blend together and flow together. And then what I want to share with you is that the 6 Ds are important considerations as we consider building these ecosystems. In fact, I'm going to argue later that the term supply chain, or our notion of supply chain, is an outdated model. We really have to talk about ecosystems. And of course, as we know, the Origin Trail whole system is actually an ecosystem, as Shiga pointed out at the start. It's not a company, it's an ecosystem. So on the first one here, digitization. Now let me just jump down onto this one. Exactly what you talked about earlier. I wasn't aware that the milk example was going to be coming out, but think about digitization as moving from analog to digital, but think also of data to value. Can you imagine a farmer that has an OT node? They could select ecosystems to exchange data and information with and monetize it at the same time as enhancing transparency and trust. Now think about that for a moment. About 2 weeks ago, I was on a briefing, a blockchain masterclass in Ireland with a university, and there was a beef farmer. The beef farmer said, look, in Ireland, there are 4 main processors that control the market. He said, I don't like that. I want a system to be able to go to the local shops. I want to be able to go direct to consumers. Putting in a node, an Origin Trail node at the farm level, can give him the possibility to be able to trade with multiple ecosystems, multiple consumption ecosystems, and also with the assurance systems to be able to enhance that transparency and trust. And as they move from digitization to digitalization, now I'm specifically calling this out because many of us misuse these terms, and there's nothing wrong with that. But digitization is that simple fact you were moving from data to digital, from analog, I should say, to digital. And we assume that everyone is already digital, but that's not the case. We still have a lot of faith-based groups in North America, in Canada, US, especially on the east coast of the US, in southern Ontario and out in western Canada that do not use technology. Some are more moderate, will use technology, but a lot do not. In that case, we need to have an ecosystem wrapped around them that helps them get into a local food system. And we also have developing countries where we cannot assume that they have the technology to be able to get to market with their products. But digitalization is about business process and role automation. This is an example of what you heard earlier from BSI and also with the smart contracts on milk, a perfect example of you're digitized and now you digitalize and you automate the business process. You put a smart contract in there and you automate the role and you get paid quicker. Digital transformation is not really about the technology, it's more about the customer journey and it's about change management. And then we have 3 other Ds that I'll build here. Democratization, this is critical, affordable access. Decentralization, which is what the Origin Trail protocol is all about. And disintermediation. Now, in that case that I mentioned earlier about the Irish farmer, disintermediation here is from the market. So those 4 big players, he wants to get away from the dependency on having to go through those big 4. But you can also think about the platforms, the big platforms like the Googles out there, or the Amazons, I should say, out there, being platform independent as well. So there's multiple levels in that disintermediation. Hopefully those 6 Ds will ring some bells. This is work in progress in my own research, and your feedback on this would be appreciated. The issues that we still have are around convergence, platforms, the platforms, again, the e-commerce platforms I'm referring to here, their use of AI, surveillance and privacy remain issues. Now, that could take up a whole session on itself just with those issues of adoption. But think about this. I want to go back to the farmer. The farmer should be able to have a node where the farmer can choose which ecosystem that he communicates with and monetizing the data. This is the single biggest problem that I come across on a day-to-day basis. Farmers not being able to monetize the data that they have on the farm. And if they're doing organic, for example, or they're doing some other credence and they're investing in that, that attribute should be verified and should be able to pass through into the consumption ecosystems so they can get more value for the products. Right now, we have a huge power asymmetry between the consumption ecosystems and the production ecosystems, and we need to balance that, and the technology can help to balance that. I want to shock you with this one. This was a project that was done in when I was advising at APEC. It was about 6 or 7 years ago. And they looked at the wine industry in Chile, and just to bring wine to the market, there was 70 different services. So there's the standard value chain, and they could be identified, 33 of which were more directly related to the wine production, 23 to the agricultural phase, and 14 transversal, which is all stages of going to market. Now, just to give you an example of this, you can see here on the grape production, agronomic services, the pest control, certification, and so on, at the vineyard level. So there's a significant amount of work. So there were 70 different services that were identified. And look down at the bottom right-hand side here. 29 of them were fully outsourced, 21 were partially outsourced. Think ecosystem. This is really what it's about. It's an ecosystem. If one of these service providers is not available, think in the context of COVID-19, if they're not available to go to the farm to do their work, the system shuts down, they can't go to market. So think about that. This work was done by Fernandez Stark and Bamber, and I can share this information if anyone is interested. It's very important. We need to think not only about the product, but all of the services related to bringing a product to the market. So digital ecosystems, are we there yet? Hell no. We still have a lot of work to do. Now, on resilience, this is the real meat of what I wanted to talk about today. All of this is multiple ecosystems that should be working together, but are not. So if we want to talk about building resilience into supply chains, we need to look at where can a shock come from. Shock can come, of course, from COVID-19, a pandemic. It could be global relationships. It could be climate change. It could be food security issues, technology, science, or energy. But what actually happened? We know that during the COVID-19 panic, there was a lot of panic buying. Now, panic buying, social science advises us or informs us that the panic buying was not actually selfishness. It was more helplessness. So think about that. It's predictable behavior. Just like before a storm, when there's a storm warning, consumers will go out and buy extra products. When consumers are faced with a danger or a crisis that's unknown, they gravitate towards utilitarian tasks like cleaning, which could be personal, or a house, because they want to contribute. And this is a way for them to regain personal control and some idea of control over their future. So think about that. The panic buying that we're seeing is more an evolutionary response, not necessarily just selfishness. On the back end, with farmers, when factories were closed down for 2 weeks, farmers in the US had to feed their pigs. Every day the pig grew a couple of pounds, and by the time the 2 weeks was over, the pig would not fit into the cages that they have at the slaughterhouses. So in the end, what happened? They had to euthanize all of the pigs. So in building this is the challenge that we have. How do we get these ecosystems connected together? And that's really the challenge. And how do we connect all of this to government so that they have a dashboard?
John, could you please wrap up? We're already over the time limit. Thank you.
Yep. So on event discovery and recovery, this is where I suggest that we build in tripwires. Technology can act as tripwires. There's a good document here, our paper that we produced earlier. And then we have circuit breakers. Really what this means is that we want to catch problems before they start. And a circuit breaker is an alternative strategy to stop and fix something. And I'll give you one example down here with line D, product quality failure. This company had a plan in place. They partially used it. They didn't rehearse. It took weeks to discover the problem, months to recover, and 100 million was the cost of that. So in summary, if you take the 6 views here to building a solution or building an ecosystem, you will have less fires to pull out. Business view. What do I want for this new house? A technical view, functional view, implementation view, standards view, and policy view. If you don't have a balance across all of those, you'll be missing out on key critical components. So in summary, transparency is no longer optional. Transparency and trust must be matured together. Technology does not replace natural science. Data and information quality is critical, but also foundational. And industry-wide proprietary platforms are not the solution. What we need are standards-based, interoperable systems. Current skills and competencies are insufficient and must be augmented with systems thinking. And what I argued or pointed out earlier, I'm arguing that supply chain is an outdated concept and digital ecosystems is where the puck is going, as they say in hockey. So sweat in peacetime, in other words, practice, you bleed less in wartime. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much, John, for this amazing presentation. And glad to have you with us again today. It's been a great journey working together over the past years. So thank you again.